Hi everyone, my name is Kristin Van Leuven, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make this watercolor holiday card. First, you'll need watercolor paper. I'm using these Strathmore pre-made watercolor cards, which make card making super easy. The textured side comes on the inside of the card, so I just flip it inside out and press it down because I prefer using the textured side of the card. I'm also using my Daler-Rowney watercolor paints, and the specific colors I'm using for this project are alizarin crimson, hooker's green, indigo, and burnt umber. For the brush, you'll need a round brush. I'm using a Princeton size 8 round brush, some water, paper towel, and I'm also using a jar with a thick rim to paint on for our wreath. So you'll kind of see how I play that out. So first, I'm taping down my paper only because the cards can pop open, so I don't want it to pop open while we're making our card. I've got some really pale burnt umber wash, and I am just brushing that straight onto the rim of our jar. Now this is going to give us a guide, a perfect circle guide for our wreath, and kind of be the base stick for our wreath. So I'm just going to press that down while it's still wet into the middle of my paper, and it's not perfect. I love that it's not perfect, but it gives us a really nice guide to create our wreath with. Now we're going to pick up a sap green and create a light wash by using a lot of water and less pigment. We're going to tap it on the paper towel to release some of the water, but this step is to mostly get the basic shape of our pine needles down, and we want to do that with a light color because with watercolor we work light to dark. So I'm using very light, quick pressure with just the tip of my brush to create these pine needles. I'm focusing on bunches of pine needles to make it look more realistic, and some of them are shorter, some of them are longer, and I'm wanting them longer and fuller towards the bottom, which is where the base of the branch is, where we're going to have kind of our main center with the pine cone. And then as I get towards the top where the two branches are meeting each other, the pine needles and the bunches are going to get smaller. Now we are going to paint our pine cone. So I'm going to pick up some burnt umber. I want it more of a medium wash, not super pigmented, but not really watery. And we're going to start by creating a top little dot and some smaller moon shapes around it. And then as we go down, we are layering and adding bigger moon shapes. So I'm just doing this kind of side swipe with my brush to create these kind of angled moon shapes. And you can look at a pine cone if you want a better reference, but try to make sure that you're leaving white space between these moon shaped sections so you can see the pieces of your pine cone so it looks like a pine cone. Pine cones have lots of texture and jagged edges as well, so don't feel like your moon shapes have to be perfect. They can be a little bit rough, especially as we're coming towards the bottom of the pine cone, and I'm imagining more of the short spiky shapes instead of the moon shapes towards the bottom. So now we're going to pick up a darker pigment of burnt umber, and while our pine cone is still wet, we are going to go in and drop in some color where the shadows would be. So that's going to be at the base of our shapes, the moon shapes. So at the curved part along the bottom, that's where your shadow is going to be. So imagine those little sections of the pine cone that are coming out of the pine cone. That's where you're going to have the shadow. And I like to add a little bit more pigment towards the bottom and continue to add some of that texture as well. Now we are going to add kind of a mid-tone value onto our pine needles. So I've just picked up sap green, but in a darker pigment, which means less water. And I don't want to completely overtake the light color of pine needles that we already have. This is more like accent colors. So sometimes I'm going over the same strokes, sometimes I'm adding a few here and there, but I just want it to look like it's contrasting and adding to the overall look and not taking anything over. So I'm also using it as an opportunity to fill out any awkward gaps. Now we're going to let that dry before we add our last pine needle detail. And I'm picking up that dark burnt umber pigment that we had before. And now we're going to go in and create the stems on our wreath. So I wanted it to look like at the bottom by the pine cone, like there's two branches coming together. So I've kind of crossed them over as if I've laid these two branches together to create this wreath. And I am connecting the branches together with this color. The trick to this is to not paint every single branch. You want to paint a piece of the branches here and there, and you want them to be uneven, wonky, kind of chunky and light in some spots so that it actually looks like twigs. Now we're going to pick up the alizarin crimson to do the first layer on our berries. Again, start with a lighter wash so you can layer a darker wash later and it will add nice contrast. So you can tell these berries are a circle, but the shape is rough. I'm not really focusing too much on perfecting it because, again, I like that it gives a more organic feel. I also like when there's a little bit of white space left because it gives depth. When it's just a solid color, it looks really flat. So my advice would be to bunch these up in 1, 2, or 3 berry groupings. And now we are going to grab some more alizarin crimson, but in a higher pigment, so that means less water. And we're just going to tap an area of the berries with that color. This is really light pressure. Again, I'm not really focused too much on where it's sitting or how it's being placed. We are just adding contrast to the berries to make them pop a little bit more. And as you know, I love contrast. So we are picking up the indigo and adding it to our green wash we already have to add our final bit of contrast to the pine needles. So we have our light wash from the bottom, we have our mid-tone wash, and now we're adding the contrasting wash. So I'm focusing this color kind of towards where the bunches are meeting the stems, thinking about where the shadows would be. I'm also doing a few strokes here and there to create more texture and create some depth in areas where I feel like it needs a little bit more fluffing out. So my biggest piece of advice is with the contrasting color, try not to overwhelm your painting with it, but adding just enough, just a little touch of it will make everything pop. Now, a fun part about doing a wreath for a card is that usually you get to put some kind of saying right in the center, so you can put in whatever you want. I chose to write happy holidays, and I love using pencil. I think it gives a nice light touch, and then you could go over it with pen if you wanted. Thanks for being here today with me as I painted this watercolor holiday card. I hope you found the techniques useful for your card making this year, and I will see you all next time. Bye.